So I think I'll start if you're ready to go.
Sure, Cynthia, whenever you're ready.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's MacEwan Celebrate Month of Scholarship presentation. I'm Cynthia Pudu, the moderator for this event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We're reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. And I always like to pair my land acknowledgement with an action for what I will do to move towards a reconciliation. And so my action is working with Indigenous young people and communities to help reduce the risk of young Indigenous people becoming homeless. So today we are joined by Dr. Tricia Lirette, Associate Professor in the Department of Human Services and Early Learning, and Lee Makovichuk. Makovichuk, sorry, Lee, Assistant Professor in Department of Human Services and Early Learning, for their presentation, Researching Professional Learning Practices for Animating Alberta's Early Learning and Care Curriculum Framework. A very, very, very timely presentation. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat and make sure to direct them to myself, the host, so that I can see them, and then I will address them at the end of the presentation during the question and answer period. So welcome, Tricia and Lee.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that introduction. And if I can just follow up on that land acknowledgement by just reiterating that this acknowledgement is really important for Lee and I as well, because it helps us to think about the generations that came before and the generations to come. And as treaty people, settlers, and early childhood educators, it teaches us that the sacred task of caring for and honoring and nurturing young children has been happening on this land, on Treaty 6 territory, for eons. So we also begin by offering our respect and observing the privilege that we have to work and live on this treaty territory, while recognizing the historical and ongoing trauma and victimization that has resulted from colonial practices and oppressions. At the same time, it makes us aware of our responsibilities to each other and to the land, and to our role in contributing to a process of ongoing and collective healing. So Treaty 6 has always been a place of gathering and sharing. And Lee and I are happy to come together with you this afternoon to share and deepen our understanding. And as Cynthia said, we also commit to doing better for all our children going forward. So it is a real pleasure to speak with you today about our ongoing research. And Lee and I are co-PIs on this project, along with another very important supportive team here that we work with at MacEwan to engage with our early learning community. So I'm going to start with just a brief overview of what we're going to do today. Lee and I want to share with you the research that we've undertaken to, firstly, research and write a brand new early learning and childcare framework for Alberta. And then secondly, to explore and provide that professional learning needs to the sector to animate and sustain the framework in their daily practice in early learning programs all across the province. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background and context for our research that we've been, as it's been unfolding, and then Lee will switch over and take over the second part of the presentation with some details related to the insights and findings that have arisen from our project. And as, yes, we promise we'll leave some time at the end if people have questions. So a little bit about early learning in Alberta. Just briefly, prior to the pandemic, there was approximately about 15,500 certified educators in early childhood programs across the province that we're hearing is probably dropped by about 3,000 since the turmoil that the pandemic has caused. And as you've been hearing in the news, we can't really say that we actually have a system of early learning in Alberta or across Canada, perhaps except for outside of Quebec. It's been described more as a disjointed patchwork of program types with little public funding, management, or oversight, which is why, as many of you might be aware, this historic federal budget announcement on Monday is really important and exciting news for us, and we hope aims to remedy some of this patchwork and disjointedness that we experience. So in Alberta, the level of quality of care and education provided in programs is highly variable. And we believe that's mostly the result of the lack of professional preparation of educators. So early childhood educators in Alberta only need a minimum of one free 54-hour course to be certified. And only about 45% of the field actually have an early childhood diploma or 2-year preparation to work in the field. So decades of advocacy and research on the value of early childhood education and for system building in the field have been virtually ignored, even though many of us have spent decades advocating for that. The governments have basically ignored it, considering more of a private responsibility than a public good. So we're left with a dysfunctional market model that has never equitably served children and families, and that, as we know from the pandemic, has shown us that it is extremely fragile. And as we entered into this research, this context really made the idea of capacity building in the field extremely important for us. So that has been part of our focus. So this project was sparked by an event that we actually sponsored at MacEwan, the Faculty of Health and Community Studies Visiting Scholar Program. We invited Dr. Pam Whitty from the University of New Brunswick to speak with us about their new curriculum framework in February of 2012. And her presentation was really well attended. We actually overflowed the Cool lecture theater, and the dean at the time, Sharon Buchhalter, was actually carrying chairs from other classrooms into the Cool so that we could manage the amount of people who attended, which actually shows the enthusiasm in the field for the work that we were about to undertake. So that presentation resulted in an invitation from the Ministry of Children's Services in Alberta for us to develop a first ever curriculum framework for children from birth to 6 years of age in Alberta. Do you want to switch the slide there, Lee? So this research is a multi-phase ongoing participatory action research project funded by the Government of Alberta, mostly the Ministry of Children's Services, with some previous funding also from Alberta Education. It's been a central plank of the Alberta government's federal provincial bilateral agreement on early childhood education to address the quality of early learning programs in the province. Since the beginning of the research in 2012, we have worked with a number of community partners to roll out the new curriculum framework, to pilot it, and to provide professional learning around it. And it's important to note that also the educators at ELM, which is MacEwan's lab school, have also been an essential part of this research and supported us in understanding what it means to work with flight in multiple ways. So I'm just going to briefly talk a bit about the stages that we've gone through so you can see the kind of research and scholarly activities that we've been involved in. So in phase one, the focus was researching, writing, and developing the curriculum framework by a 70-person Alberta-wide advisory committee. The framework was originally titled Play, Participation, and Possibilities. The new framework was built on learning from the advisory committee and also from other national and international curriculum models. and informed by decades of research on who young children are as learners. So this phase of work was really exciting, but challenging in that it provoked many conversations as we were debating and questioning and collaborating and challenging taken for granted ideas about early learning and the role of educators. We took this responsibility of considering how we are shaping the learning environments for young children in the province very seriously, knowing from the start that we would need to work alongside educators to understand what it means to co-construct curriculum with young children and their families, and young children who we envision as mighty learners and citizens. So during this phase, we worked collaboratively with 3 center-based early learning and childcare programs and 1 family day home program to explore and test the ideas of the new curriculum. Believe me, Lee can attest to, there was plenty of writing and rewriting and more rewriting as we sought to clarify ideas and key concepts about our visions and values for this framework. During this phase, we intentionally linked flight to the Alberta Kindergarten Program Statement to support continuity into more formalized school settings. And with permission, we did adapt the goals from the New Brunswick curriculum for our Alberta context. So we were busy in phase 1. In phase 2, we actively researched how educators could use the framework to guide their practice. With the new framework in hand, we investigated the feasibility of on-site pedagogical support programs, and that led to the formation of 6 lighthouse models. And these were early learning programs that re-envisioned their program structures to support continued professional learning around curriculum development. In phase 3, we expanded our lighthouse models into 3 Northern Alberta community programs and also developed some serialized professional learning opportunities about the framework. The knowledge that we generated in these early phases contributed to the creation of an online orientation course. And this was a parallel project that was funded by Alberta Education. Because we were working with Alberta Education, we were required to make all our curriculum documents available in French. And so during that phase, we translated the document into French, and it's entitled En vol en français. In phases 4, 5, and 6, we piloted the orientation course. And in phase 4, we worked with the first 22 Alberta early learning and childcare programs that were offering $25 a day childcare. And then in phase 5 and 6, we leveraged the learnings gained from that pilot and continued to learn from educators who were taking up flight when the $25 a day program was expanded to 122 programs. And during that phase, we had the goal of delivering the course to 5 educators in each of the 122 sites over phase 5 and 6. Also in this phase, based on research that we got from the sector, we undertook a branding and renaming process, and play, participation, and possibilities, which was too many P's and quite a mouthful, became flight. And a new look and a new project website were developed to support the project. During this phase, we also hosted some focus groups to help us understand the specific needs of some diverse types of programs. So as you know, in Alberta, early learning programs serve many diverse kind of families. They take many diverse forms. And so we worked with some programs that were serving immigrant and refugee families, special needs children, and Indigenous children on how they were taking up flight in their specialized programs. And that brings us to phase 7, which we're currently in, which began in the fall of 2020. And as the government has phased out the $25 day sites, and with pressure from the broader community and the rest of the sector, the flight course was made available to all Alberta early learning programs, including profit, not-for-profit, preschools, family day home, and out-of-school care. Which brings us to where we're at today, and I'm happy to say that there will be a phase 8. as on March 31st, we received funding for 2 more years of research and development around the professional learning needed to support flight. Next slide, Lee. So it's important for us as just provide background to you on what we mean by curriculum. So in the early years, curriculum is a way of being together in relationship. So flight is different than a traditional curriculum. And typically when we talk about curriculum, we think immediately about curriculum in maybe K-12 programs or post-secondary curriculum that is subject matter and outcomes based. Instead, in early learning, we often characterize curriculum as inside out or upside down compared to formal curriculum in school systems. Flight is different in that it's a play-based curriculum that's built collaboratively with educators, children, and families, and considers the local context of the program and the social, cultural, and traditional practices of families. The framework isn't a how-to manual or a cookbook type approach, because in early childhood, everything we do with children is curriculum. Curriculum is taking place during routine times of the day, like changing diapers and serving lunch and snack. It's taking place during transitions, when we're dressing to go outside or cleaning up. It is part of the daily play experiences that happen at things like sand and water tables, in the art area and the social dramatic play corner, and also at arrival and departure time in our connections with families as we shape and report on significant daily events for their children. So we always begin to think about curriculum by considering what the children are doing in their play and what their play tells us about what they already know and what they are already exploring. Previously, the early learning sector did not think about curriculum in this way at all. They didn't think about these daily experiences as curriculum. So thinking with flight requires educators to make a significant shift in how they understand their daily work. Flight is a socio-cultural framework that explores young children as learners and citizens. It proposes 3 newly conceptualized roles for early childhood educators in relation to curriculum that we call a co-learner, co-imaginer, and co-researcher. This is a foundational shift away from thinking of educators as technicians or supervisors, or worst of all, babysitters, or custodians, or experts in child development. So flight acknowledges that what educators do matters for them and for children and families. And we know that across Alberta, curriculum was already being enacted, and curriculum decisions were already being made every day. And so for us, we wanted the opportunity to talk about and think about why educators do what they do, and that their in the moment practices could become more intentional and authentic ways of doing curriculum and living curriculum with young children. So as an example of this, one study in New Zealand found that in a typical workday, educators made over 936 curriculum decisions that were not always thoughtfully made, and sometimes just based on habit or outdated thinking. So the framework provides a common language to describe what's already happening and to think more purposefully about what educators can do to extend children's play and learning. Go ahead, Lee. So as noted, this is a play-based curriculum that's framed by 4 broad holistic goals, as you can see here on the slide. Curriculum building in early learning always begins by observing children's play. And we think of play as being the active, exploratory, creative, expressive process through which children participate in, learn about, and actively make sense of their world. Research shows greater long-term gains for children who participate in play-based programs compared to programs with a more academic focus. One researcher, Lillian Katz, writes persuasively that young children need less focus on academics and more focus on intellectually engaging experiences. And we can't think of anything more intellectually engaging than children's play. So the role of educators is to provide young children with as many opportunities as possible to actively participate in play experiences that promote these goals. And we think that this is what sets children up to be successful today and in the future, providing a strong sense of themselves as a learner and participator, someone with agency that can make things happen in support of their own learning and in learning alongside others. The goals are not intended to tell educators what to do, but rather they're intended to engage educators to think about the possibilities that arise from their daily work with children as they create responsive play and learning environments that in turn nurtures each children's disposition to learn. The dispositions are listed on the right-hand side of the slide, and they were devised with help of our advisory committee and also families who helped us select these 5 dispositions to learn and highlight in the framework to focus educator attention on, and to remind us that these dispositions to learn can be either nurtured or diminished within the child in the classroom by educators' interactions and the curriculum decisions that they make. So the dispositions are foundational to each child seeing themselves as a learner, thinking, I am someone who is playing with ideas and with others. I'm someone who is seeking to know. I'm someone who is participating with others. I'm someone who is persisting through challenges. And I'm someone who's caring about the world and about others. So we want educators to notice, name, and nurture these dispositions to make them visible to themselves, to children, and to families, and to signal to everyone that these are what's valued, these dispositions are valued in our program. All right, next slide, Lee. So to give you a better understanding of what flight curriculum is about, we recently completed a video project as part of our dissemination strategy. So we want to show you this quick 3-minute video that was filmed in partnership with 3 early learning program sites in Edmonton. And it's intended to introduce some of the foundational ideas from the framework to families and others who are interested in flight. So enjoy for 3 minutes. Oh, I get goosebumps watching that. Thanks, Lee, for showing that video. We hope that gives you a sense of the inspirational work that we've been involved in. And so I'm going to turn the presentation over to Lee, who's going to share some additional information about how our research has progressed.
Thank you, Tricia. Oh, let me just move that forward. Yes. So yes, this study is grounded in the literature of professional learning in early childhood education and care, which calls for approaches to professional learning that move beyond transmission modes and workshop models towards participatory approaches. Professional development in the early childhood field has been dominated by short, fragmented, one-shot workshops on a variety of topics delivered by experts who offer strategies and techniques outside the context of the daily teaching and learning with children. Alternately, the emerging scholarship around distributed leadership models in early childhood education and care is encouraging critical reflection and investigation of pedagogy within specific settings. It highlights flexible and responsive approaches to curriculum making and the development of learning communities within and across programs. As others have done, we are building on the work of Mitchell and Kuby from New Zealand. They see the educator-learner as a starting point in investigating and critically reflecting on their own practice as a way to challenge assumptions and extend thinking by embedding theoretical and content knowledge about alternative practices into daily reflection and planning. Still, the significant role of the outside perspective of someone working alongside as a partner, a collaborator, a provocateur, troubles the notion of mentor and leader in an effort to enact a more reciprocal and democratic relational professional learning environment, one that acknowledges the experience and insights of those who work directly with young children and their families every day. The professional learning structures that we have been investigating begins with a collective of professionals coming together to explore practice. The approach emerging in the discourse of professional learning and early childhood education involves collaborative co-inquiry, where collaborators are educators, children, families, and early childhood teacher educators. A pedagogical voice for inviting childcare workers to see themselves as educators with the capacity to participate in and lead pedagogical conversations about their work with children and families, seeing educators as having pedagogical theories, and opportunities for dialogue with an outside voice for prodding and poking and encouraging and inviting new ideas and theory practice connections. These professional learning structures are reshaping organizational structures within programs by bringing educators together across sites and to discuss their work. And this is calling on programs to be more collaborative than competitive. Also by scheduling and protecting educator out of ratio time to create opportunities for reflection on practice. Traditionally, educator-child ratios require 100% of the workday with children. Making time in the workday for educator reflection on practice is new and still emerging as a necessary aspect of early learning and childcare practice. Investigating these supported structural conditions for professional learning and educator engagement with the curriculum framework, we asked the following questions. How do educators use the framework to support children's play and learning for strengthening professional practice? And what serialized professional learning model can be used to explore a co-inquiry process of curriculum meaning making that integrates foundational course-based knowledge of flight with ongoing facilitated and structured pedagogical conversations for evolving professional practice? Toward answering these questions, the next 3 slides highlight some of the results from the data gathered through midpoint and final course surveys of the online introductory course, that offers practicing educators an opportunity to learn about the flight framework, and focus group interviews with practicing educators using flight over time. So, to date, there have been 75 sections of the online course offered over 9 terms beginning fall 2017. Currently, we have 534 course takers across 20 course sections wrapping up winter term. We are projecting a total of 1,586 educators achieving course completion by June 2021. Our course completion rate averages 85%. So to provide a context for these numbers, we fluctuate between 12,000 and 16,000 practicing early childhood educators in Alberta. In July 2020, we received 2,800 expressions of interest for the fall course. In November, we received 1,500 expressions of interest for the winter term. And still, to examine the effectiveness of the course, we surveyed course participants about the gains in their knowledge about the curriculum framework at the end of the course. This chart is one example. And on the left-hand side, it illustrates that at the beginning of the fall and winter course terms, 52% of course participants began the course with no knowledge or little knowledge of the flight framework. In fact, course participants reported that only 17% of them had some knowledge of flight. At the course completion, which is on the right-hand side, 97% of course participants reported that they were knowledgeable or very knowledgeable about the flight framework. So one course participant offered the following insight. The most significant thing that I have learned from this course is to be a reflective in my practices, how to do pedagogical documentation processes and apply what flight is about in my work and daily experiences. So it is evident to us through this data that Alberta educators desire the opportunity to learn about the flight framework. With the reported gains in knowledge, the course offers participants a significant opportunity for building foundational learning about the framework, core concepts, goals, and pedagogical processes. We are expecting to deliver another 70 sections in the next 2 years for up to 2,000 course participants. And still, it is an introductory course, and what it takes to sustain flight over time requires further investigation. So we carried out a focus group interview in 2020. It is timely to engage the sector in understanding what sustaining flight looks like, given that some educators and programs have taken up flight as a guiding document. Some of the educators who participated in the focus group had been using flight for up to a year, having learned about flight in their post-secondary program before entering the field. Other educators had been part of the early research and development of the flight framework and continue to use flight to guide their practice with children and families. And still other participants had experience ranging from 2 to 6 years. The focus group interviews with educators have offered us a tremendous source of data, which we are still interpreting, and we are beginning to understand that sustaining flight involves periods of learning that overlap and are reciprocal, deepening educator understanding of flight as they ask practice-related questions, explore and revisit ideas, and dialogue with others. We are framing these periods of learning using metaphorical terms: nesting, fledgling, practicing, soaring. We think these terms depict growth and change and are relatable to rural and urban, social and cultural community contexts. During the nesting period of learning, educators tell us that they first notice the language of the flight framework. They ask questions such as, what's the purpose? Why is it important? How do I do this? Can I do it? The document can appear daunting, And educators report feelings of uncertainty and also excitement. Some educators begin by reading and talking about ideas, while other educators watch and listen to those early starters. During the fledgling period of learning, educators begin to explore the document further. Educators report that they look to others. I relied on others to support me to learn more and different ways to use the framework, one participant said. Another, I was so nervous, yet so thankful to connect with other centers also new to flight. Educators' uncertainty and not knowing appear in their words. I was concerned. I did not yet know and understand the language. I wasn't sure I knew what I was talking about. Educators report that changes in staff, challenging experiences with children can cause a cycling back to the nesting period. In the fledgling period, new questions emerge about the ideas in flight. What is multimodal literacies or post-foundational? The period of practicing seems to flow quickly from the fledgling period as educators begin to create strategies for referencing flight goals and dispositions to learn. During this period, the support of the program becomes significant for arranging out of ratio time and also for ongoing learning and professional conversations. A focus on asking questions to address one's curiosity and supporting deeper and open dialogue are explored. There appears an understanding that the wrong questions can bring a defensiveness and shut others down. In the practicing period, educators report increasing comfort with knowing flight and then opening it up and finding something new. In the period of soaring, educators report, I move between practicing and soaring. You need to be open to change, taking risks, being vulnerable. Flight always opens my eyes to new ideas and seeing things in a different way. Educators also report significant and supportive changes to program structures that dedicate time and energy to community conversations or reflective practice conversations. The language of flight is embedded in program documentation, and educators say that their language has changed and everything is filtered through flight. When they feel as though they are soaring with flight, educators describe, I'm comfortable with change and challenge in our learning, alongside a sense of pride in hearing, I was told I breathe flight. We're going to share another video here with you that was created alongside the previous video. You will hear words of educators talking about the work with children and families, and see clips of educators and children in daily encounters in local early childhood environments. Inspired by Flight was created to showcase Alberta early childhood educators.
Flight Framework is a document. It's not a book that you're gonna pick up, read it and say, okay, I know it. We're learning about the child, nurturing children's ability to be playful, to seek out questions and be curious, to participate with others. And children are already doing these things. But when we start to pay attention to them, we have the opportunity to nurture them. And that has been always the intention for it.
How we see children, the image of the child, affects everything that we do with children. Recognizing every child as a mighty learner is recognizing that every child is full of potential, that they are each on their own path and they each have their own strengths. It recognizes the importance of relationships and of communicating.
I'm co-learning alongside them. What this does is help you create ideas on your own, to really look, and as I'm noticing a child doing this, how can I name what they're exploring, and then how do I nurture it? It's a document that you can open up and find something that resonates with you and start there.
As I went through the document and understood things and we went through the steps, in reality it was a part of our practice and it was what we were already doing, so it didn't become more work. It just highlighted who we already were. Even though I've kind of lived and breathed this document for almost 9 years, I don't feel like I'm done. There's always something else to wonder about and to think about and to reflect on.
The flight for me has been like a mentor. It is like a guide and a support for me. Whenever I have a question, a concern, I just go back to Flight and I look for it. It has beautifully put forward the role of an educator.
As early childhood educators, we know that children are learning through play. They learn through everything that they're doing. And the Flight framework gave us that professional language to use to highlight that learning. It gave us the opportunity to share ideas amongst educators and to show families what their children were learning.
A framework is something that's open, that's not set in stone. So a framework is a place to start a relationship with a family or a child. The way Flight looks at my center is not the way Flight looks at a different center, because that's where we come in, where our personalities and the culture of the center comes in, and you mold it to reflect your values and who you are as a center.
We have these things called learning stories. And with learning stories, we write down our observations and we write down our insights and reflections with those learning stories. And those insights and reflections are words directly coming from the Flight framework. It's a meaning-making tool and trying to match things together and really understanding the foundational things that the children are going through every single day.
We really want educators and directors and programs to understand that this work doesn't end. There will always be another group of children arriving at the program and more educators arriving at the program, and the curriculum that comes out of those relationships, it's meant to be unique to the local community. Everybody does it differently, and we celebrate that.
So as researchers, we're humbled by the educators. The educators have been so generous with their engagement to talk about the work taking place, to think deeply about what children do in commonplace, quotidian moments, and ask questions, try out ideas, challenge assumptions, and theorize practice. Their engagement has made this research possible. So this multi-phase participatory action research project has offered us many lessons, insights, and learnings about how educators learn about and are using Flight as a guiding document. We have captured 5 key insights here. 1, learning is messy and nonlinear. It happens in dedicated moments and over time and across contexts with others. Time, knowledge, and support are relational and entangled aspects for learning about and working with Flight. 2, using Flight in practice is a journey filled with leaps forward and challenges involving scheduled time for learning and reflection. Changes in staffing, lack of out-of-ratio time in daily work create stops and starts and appear as both obstacles and opportunities. To reach a period of learning when educators feel as though they are soaring takes up to 3 years. Soaring is not the end. It is when educators fully realize that there is no end point. There will always be children and families to care for and to learn alongside. 3, opportunities for professional conversations continue to be essential for evolving our collective understanding of localized early childhood curriculum. As noted by a focus group participant, because of the support of this pedagogical partner, we are committed to our change practices. Once a month, we have community conversations, formerly called team supervisor meetings, and dedicated reflective practice conversations. 4, sustaining Flight in practice involves continued opportunities for networking and practice-based discussions with the support of external voices. The meaning making for putting Flight into practice is about creating relational spaces with others where all voices are heard and valued, and it calls on educators and those bringing external voices to marvel at what children do, to raise real questions, to wonder about what and how others come to know, and to listen to the diverse experiences of care and curriculum. 5, Flight makes a difference. And as stated here by a winter course participant, before taking part in the Flight Framework course, I was not practicing reflection. I definitely had my beliefs and values about childcare and used my skills in education to provide quality programming for children. But looking back on it, I was just moving through my days without a thought of how my interactions and experiences were affecting not only the children's learning and growth, but my own as well. And so, as we reflect on the topics, societal resilience, recovery, and transformation that bring MacEwan Scholarship together, we are witness to early childhood communities as places of resilience and transformation. The Flight Framework is contributing to the transformation of early childhood practices, from habitual tasks for keeping children safe and healthy to transformational spaces that bring people together for understanding the unique nature of care and localized curriculum. In early childhood, curriculum begins with the children's everyday experiences of care and play that are first within safe and healthy environments, and also alongside educators who are co-learners, co-researchers, and co-imaginers of possibilities. As co-learners, educators learn about each child within a group and how learning is messy, nonlinear, and socially and culturally situated. As co-researchers, educators seek multiple and diverse perspectives for understanding what it means for families and children to experience care and play. And as co-imaginers of possibilities, educators work with families and other colleagues to continue to grow more diverse and creative spaces. In Flight, we call this a place of vitality, strong, active, and energetic early childhood communities that nurture all Alberta children as mighty learners and citizens. As Tricia mentioned, the research and development of Flight continues. In going forward, we are building on the learning and insights gained in previous phases of research as we continue to explore what learning processes are most effective for introducing, sustaining, and growing educators' understanding of Flight? And how do educators take up and use Flight in local communities? Thank you for attending our session today, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you, Lee and Tricia. So I just like to remind everyone that if you have a question, just to enter it directly to myself in the chat, and then I will read it out to Tricia and Lee. So the first question, I'll read it slowly, and if you need me to repeat, let me know, is I'm really interested in the reflection practice and reflection time component of your discussion. When you imagine how that time could be best used, I'm wondering if that time is imagined for those learning journey books for each child, for program space planning, for reflection on the educator's own practice, or something else I'm not imagining. And if you need me to repeat it, let me know.
So I'll start, and Tricia, maybe you want to join in to fill in anything that I don't address. So this reflective practice and the time requirement. And so building in time for reflection on practice is important. It helps educators move from in that moment knowledge, which guides their curriculum decisions, in the moment curriculum decisions, to thinking about that, the question of why do I do what I do? And by bringing that why forward for themselves, they're able to see and to think about how what they do matters. And it does, what they do matters. And so it also leads to further intentional curriculum decisions that educators continue to make in those daily moments. And so understanding that, you know, when an educator is offering particular materials to a child, why did they select those materials over other materials, or why did they offer them at that time versus another time, helps them to understand that those are curriculum decisions that offer children further opportunities for playing. It nurtures their play, it expands and extends their play, and this becomes very part of, you know, intuitive but also intentional practices. Tricia, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I think that was, I think that was a great response. Thanks. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. Did that
Thank
answer
you.
the question?
I have not seen a response, so I'll wait for the person who wrote that if they would like to. If yes, check mark. So again, a couple waiting for more questions, but I've got one. I have very, very fond memories of my children being at the early learning center at MacEwan, and so and being co-researchers, the children being co-researchers, I thought was the most wonderful part. But this being very timely, how would you respond or convince people that don't have personal experiences like myself in these types of centers that you know, encouraging easier funding or $10 a day daycare, childcare is more than just quote unquote institutionalized childcare? What's sort of the quick elevator pitch to get people to understand the importance of this type of learning?
Thanks, Cynthia. Do you want me to talk about that a bit, Lee?
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I mean, I think it's a big question about, as a society, what we you know, we think about where do we want to invest, and decades of research. I mean, early learning experiences have been, you know, researched thoroughly. And all of it points to the understanding that these years are really, really important in young children's lives, and how they spend their time and what they do and who they're with during those early years is really, really important, not just for future trajectories, but for what's happening for children today as well. So I think we have to think about early learning the same way we think about providing K-12 education, making it available, making it accessible, making it quality. I think that's the way that we should think about what's happening for the youngest members of our society right now. And you know, if we follow the evidence, we already know what we need to do. We already have the answers to the questions. We just need the will and the resourcing to do it appropriately.
Yeah, to build on that, I think that it's time to acknowledge that we all benefit from quality early childhood education and care. It allows families to go and do the work that they do in whatever field that they're in, with less worry about what's happening for their children and what their children are doing. And I think that this early learning and care can also offer families the insight about what play means for their child, what these dispositions to learn means, and again that flows right up into the education system.
Thanks, and I can attest to that again with my personal experience. And I always love to share that my youngest, who's almost 13 now, a friendship was fostered through your staff at daycare, and the two of them are still very, very close friends and see each other all the time. So I always love to say that it was because of MacEwan's early learning that these two girls were able to meet and become friends. So I have another question. Do you see flight contributing to educators seeking opportunities for more education, specifically a diploma or degree?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much synergy from the research that we did around flight in that aligned with introducing our new Bachelor of Early Childhood Curriculum Studies degree here at MacEwan. So yeah, we've been really advocating for additional professional preparation for early childhood educators, because we know that one of the easiest levers that we can move in terms of improving the quality of experiences that young children get is to increase the professional preparation. And we've been actively advocating for additional educational opportunities. And what really was happening previously when we only offered a diploma is that if people wanted to advance their education, they actually have to leave the field of early childhood education because there wasn't any way to ladder their diploma into further education. So yeah, we see a lot of, as I said, synchronicity between the flight research, the reconceptualizing of this role, and the need for additional professional preparation.
How does that connect with, or is there a barrier to access or to people wanting to get this degree and the compensation they would get once they graduate? Because, you know, we always hear the stories of childcare workers not getting paid what they're worth. So just curious about that.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, people always ask us that, but you know, this is my cheeky answer. They don't ask people who graduate from arts and sciences what they make. So we do know, of course, that we want people who are working with our youngest citizens to be professionally prepared and professionally compensated. We do know that this is a rich and complex role that they're undertaking in the lives of children and their work with families. And we can't expect them to be considered, you know, as they got labeled during the pandemic, essential workers with all these additional responsibilities without fair compensation. So we do hope, again, that this federal government announcement, along with lower fees for families, will also help create salary grids or salary floors for people who are working in the sector. And we also continue to advocate for our own provincial government, who actually tops up certified early childhood educators' wages to add a fourth level. We currently have 3 levels of professional wage enhancement. And we are hoping for a 4th level that recognizes degree prepared people in the field as well.
Yeah, I think I just heard last night on the news, there was a comment made that universal childcare would limit the amount of options to families about childcare. And universal childcare doesn't do that. Universal childcare actually brings in you know, salary grids for educators, and while creating affordable, accessible, and quality childcare for families.
In many formats, right? That still includes family day home providers, that still includes group-based center care, or center-based group care, sorry, and lots of options for people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is a perfect place to end. We are at the end of the session. So thank you again, Tricia and Lee, for your great presentation. And thank you, everybody, for attending today's MacEwan Celebrates Month of Scholarship presentation. Just as a reminder, if you know anyone who will be interested in viewing this and all our other presentations, they will be publicly available by May 1st on MacEwan's YouTube channel under the MacEwan Celebrates Month of Scholarship playlist. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.